who is our last contributor and the founder and member of Community Roots, Bolton, whose goal as a community project is to address food poverty and to include working class people in the fight against climate change. They do this by employing permaculture ethics and principles in their community development and educational work. So I'll stop screen sharing so that we can see Steve.
Right, so a little bit about my background. I'm Steve. I was born in Salford in Greater Manchester, and I grew up in some quite rough, impoverished areas. I was actually born in a tower block in Salford that was named after, ironically, after the poet and illustrator William Blake. And when I left school at 16, Margaret Thatcher had been in power for 1 year. So the idea of jobs for life had completely gone by that time. I wasn't very interested in anything the Labour movement had to offer. I wanted adventure, and because I've been a punk rocker in the sort of early era and post-punk era, I got into all sorts of stuff, anarchism, environmentalism, and I found all this very exciting. So to fast forward a little bit, throughout much of the 80s, I was part of the free festival circuit, and we were sort of labelled in a derogatory manner as New Age travellers. And then in the 90s, I spent 6 years in a punk reggae band. And this was a very multicultural affair. We had 2 Jamaican guys in the band, myself from Salford, a guy from South Manchester, and a Northern Irish guy on the keyboard. So we were a right mixture, and people didn't really know how to take us. Middle class and working class people at venues thought we were a bit peculiar. So that was quite a good thing in a way. So a lot of what happened in those 2 decades really inspired and gave me a bit of an outlook in life. So let's fast forward a little bit. So me and my partner had a conversation in the early 2000s in our back garden about the fact that hardly anybody on our estate could afford to buy organic vegetables. Most people on our estate at the time were either on very low income or were unemployed. And it just seemed completely unfair and unethical that people couldn't afford to buy something as rudimentary and simple as cleanly grown vegetables. So we set about trying to deal with this in the most practical way we could. And this involved my partner applied for some money from the Hindu Forum, and she worked with 6 really skint families who were really struggling with all sorts of multiple deprivation issues. And that was our first ever project that we delivered. So part of that growing kit was a raised bed, soil, plug plants, lots of seeds, and then a once-a-week visit for sort of help with gardening, horticulture issues, etc. And we could kind of see that this sort of had some momentum, and it was beginning to form a thread. So a couple of years later, I was a mental health program tutor. The job was cut short by conservative cuts to provision. So after that job ended, I went back to the job and I delivered a community food growing project for people with mental health issues. That went down really well. I did that for around 8 months. And then we had another opportunity. We met a guy who was a community development worker in a local pub. And he said to us rather playfully, he said, "Why don't you speak to the landlord and see if he'll let you use the tennis court in his grounds to grow food on?" So being game for a laugh and also half serious as well, I approached the landlord. 2 weeks later, we were on a clay tennis court making raised beds and growing food. And for the next 3 years, all the food that we grew there was going to the YMCA. It was going to a long-running project in Bolton that fed refugees and asylum seekers. And we grew plenty of food using organic horticulture and permaculture methods. And then another opportunity arose when we were contacted out of the blue by somebody from NACRO, Criminal Justice Organisation. So we went over to East Manchester and I spent a whole summer. And what I did was I broke down components of permaculture. I took all the intellectual stuff away and I delivered it as very practical sessions every week to long-term serious offenders, people who were armed robbers with substance misuse issues. That went down really well. We were invited back and we did a little bit more with them, but inevitably we had to move on. So I was approached by somebody from a housing charity in Bolton, a guy called Tony, quite a forward-thinking guy who grew his own food. And I ended up working with him for 6 years. And we worked with 25 families every year growing food on this really skint council estate. And the amusing element was there was 3 or 4 of us dragging this old B&Q trolley round the estate full of resources every week. And people sort of recognised us, and people would be asking for plants and soil and seeds. So it sort of had its own momentum because we were out on the streets. We weren't part of an organisation. We were just like the people who lived on the estates. So there was an element of trust there. We did that for 6 years. We planted around 200 fruit trees on this estate in various locations in people's gardens. We did a little bit of guerrilla gardening, which was a bit naughty, but hey ho. And while we were working with this housing charity, we also developed 2 hubs and menning sheds group that also grew food. And we worked with refugee men and help them to grow food. And another project, which is around a 5-minute walk from where we live, also food growing. We delivered introductions to permaculture there, and a lot of men who attend this project have mental health issues. So lockdown came, and we thought, how can we work within lockdown? And then this little light bulb went on, and that little light bulb was permitted exercise. So me and my partner loaded the car up with edible plants, and we drove around the estate, and we used permitted exercise time to drop plants off at people's houses. And we put them at the bottom of the gardens, just behind the gate. And we had our own Facebook group called Food Growers of Bolton. And we just sort of said to people, if you need any advice or tips on growing, contact us through this Facebook group. That went down really well. The group's still going now. We've got around 450 members. And then shortly as we were coming out of lockdown, I met an old friend, Alan from Bolton Diggers, who a food group that had existed for around 22, 23 years. And they also help people to grow food, people on low or no income, asylum seekers, refugees, basically anybody that's struggling. Now, Alan had quite a sizable chunk of around 1/4 of an acre of land that he let us use for absolutely nothing on his site. So we applied for funding from Awards for All, set a polytunnel up, and we're in year 2. And all the food, we grew masses of food. We gave the food to people who attended the project. We gave it to refugee projects, to homeless projects. And then I can remember reading something on Transition Together about the seed funding. So we applied for funding for a fruit tree project. And the idea initially was to plant 70 fruit trees on the council estate where we actually live. We ended up planting 85 fruit trees and 85 bushes, simply by knocking on people's doors and saying, all right, do you want a fruit tree? And they'd either say yes or no. We developed some great relations with the local Muslim community while we were doing this. And they brought us close to tears by saying, the work that you're doing is a very, very selfless act, and it's really beautiful. And we were offered food and drinks every time we stopped to work with Muslim families, which was absolutely amazing. So let's fast forward to right now. We've been successful in applying for Transitions seed funding again. And I'm just waiting at the moment for the payment to go into my bank account. And I'm actually watching close on 400,000 vegetable and fruit seeds on eBay, which I'm getting ready to purchase. As soon as that check hits my account, I'm going to buy those seeds, and we're going to be all over Bolton at different locations, working with families, community groups, individuals, people in streets, anybody who will entertain us. And we're going to take our little kits with us, loads of seeds, seed trays, compost, and we're going to try and get the whole town growing. We've also got funding to buy around 50 fruit trees and 50 fruit bushes out of this. So that's what we're doing. And we find that because there isn't really anything in the statutory domain that recognises that there's a need for a food culture in working class communities. There's loads of people using food banks. The stuff that you get from food banks isn't that nutritious, really. I think it's great that the food's available. It's keeping people alive, but there's a lot of sweet, heavy carbohydrate stuff. So we think this thing of having fresh food and giving people access to fresh food is likely to have a good effect on the health, basically. And they're going to learn new skills. They're going to learn how to grow food. In many cases, how to get on with the neighbours who they've either not spoken to at all, or they've just sort of mumbled the odd thing in passing. And to characterize our group, I'm not sure how close towards the 10 minutes I am, but I'd say community roots food growing project is fighting inequality through growing food. It's about permanent change. It's about inclusion. It's about sharing knowledge from different cultures, different time eras, different places, bringing people together. And also, it's about having a good laugh and joy and being human. And it's really easy to do this. And I've kind of, over the last sort of 15 years, on and off, it's been my job. Rather than being cooped up in some crappy office, I'd rather take a year, apply for funding, live on subsistence wages, grow food, forage food, but actually get out there into the community and try and make this permanent difference that we really, really need. And I think particularly in the last two, I've always admired the transition movement, but in the last few years, we've got absolutely no complaints as a working class group. They've hit all the spots with us, and we're now a transition group, which I'm rather proud of. And people can access us. Anybody in our area can access our services and come and work with us. We've got decades and decades of skills, and we run courses all the time. I mean, we're running a guerrilla gardening course in a few weeks' time. We're going to be running introductions to permaculture all throughout the summer. Making earth ovens, rocket stoves, lots of quirky, interesting stuff that brings people together, that saves people money, and that saves people the planet. And I'm not sure what else to say, really. And I mean, what our work and my vision is very similar to all of the other speakers that we've had tonight. There's sort of a little bit of each in the work that we do. We've also, over the years, some of the people who've come and volunteered with us, for example, more recently, Ben suffered with bad anxiety and depression. He's now at the end of his first year in a community studies degree. So we really encourage and support people and try and help them to move on. We had a guy who worked with us called Land Rover Dave. He had appalling health issues. He worked with us for 6 years, and he was nearly in tears for thanking us for supporting him and inviting him onto the project. And all this has been done with little funding pots of a few grand here and there. We've never had a massive funding pot, and maybe in the future we'll end up as a community interest company, maybe not. But I'm certainly, as while I'm alive and I've still got my health, I'm going to carry on doing the work that we do, being reflective about what we do, looking at the needs of the community, and just carrying on with it. So a big thank you to everybody.
A big thank you to you. Thank you so much, Steve.